Good morning, everyone. For those who were up late last night, and good day for those who were up early this morning. Welcome to discussion, The Secrets of Trust Building. Discussion will be in English, and discussion will last for 1 hour, and you will be. You can ask questions during the last 15 minutes of our discussion. Before I introduce the topic, I would like to present myself. My name is Agnese Cimdiņa. I will moderate this discussion. I'm social anthropologist, also head of diversity and inclusion practice at PwC Latvia, and I have been also working as a researcher, specifically focusing on trust for several years. So this is one of my favorite topics. Now I would like to give the floor to our wonderful panelists, and you can introduce with yourself who you are. Let's start with Ieva.
Good morning, everybody, and my name is Ieva Tetere, and currently I'm working as a head of SEB Bank in Latvia, so CEO of the bank, close to 10 years already. But before that, I have been also 10 years working with PwC, a bit in London, a bit in Riga, so quite an international experience.
Thank you. Ivars?
Hello, I'm Ivars Austers. I'm professor of social psychology from University of Latvia, and that's actually the only thing what I'm ready to do, to run some research, and so I'm not very much in the practical side of the life, so to say.
Okay, Katju?
Yes, good morning, and I'm very happy to be here today, so thank you for the invitation. I'm Katju Holkeri. I work for the Finnish Ministry of Finance, where I'm head of governance policy unit, and that means that we work with the issues that kind of constitute the good governance pillars. And actually, trust is one of the working areas. It was added some 5 years ago to our list of work. And then also I'm chairing the OECD's Open Government Working Party.
Okay, thank you. And Lars?
My name is Lars Trägårdh. I'm a historian, now tied to Uppsala University, and I have for quite a few decades now been leading a big survey on trust in Sweden, at the local level. So that's what I think is the most relevant information here, but I'm a historian, so I'll also have some historical perspectives, hopefully, that I can offer.
Yeah, and you have also written a book which is called The Swedish Theory of Love, which is somehow related to trust, and we will touch upon a little bit later. So this discussion is organized by Nordic Council of Ministers Office in Latvia, and I have to say that we have actually been discussing trust also earlier in Lampa. It was in 2018. It was a time when a report was published called Trust Nordic Gold, and this is maybe a kind of follow-up discussion because the relevance of trust has not declined. It's becoming even more and more important, and we will focus on both Nordic and Latvian perspectives. And I have to tell you that research shows that in the Nordic countries there is an exceptionally high level of social trust. And the Nordic region, as you maybe might know, is regarded as the world champion in social trust, world leader in social trust among its population. And that's why the high level of social trust is called Nordic Gold, both for individuals and for society. And just to highlight some of the most widespread assumptions in Nordic countries about trust, I can just list some of these assumptions. Trust is one of the Nordic region's most vital resources. Trust is the resource that holds Nordic societies together. Trust is one of the guiding values of Nordic leadership. Trust makes Nordic countries globally competitive. A high level of trust has positive synergies for innovations, for economic growth, for happiness, for democracy. Trust relations are also a prerequisite for successfully launching a business in foreign countries. And trust is also a cornerstone of functioning democracy. And mutual trust benefits everyone: yourself, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your business, your municipality, your governance. So this is what research says about Nordic countries and trust. But at the same time, Latvia and Nordic countries are on quite different ends on this axis of social trust, and we see that while Nordic countries are champions, Latvia is lagging far behind. So one of the goals or incentives of this discussion is to discuss, can we learn something from Nordic trust? Can there be local differences in trusting? Is this so-called Nordic trust the only way of trusting? And what expectations about trust are actually embedded in our perceptions and expectations, from our environments and our states? And what exactly this culture of trust consists of in those sectors which we work? And what can we do to increase trust? So this is an introduction to the topic. And then let's turn to our panelists. And maybe I would like to start by asking each of you, what does social trust means to you specifically? And how does it manifest in your own life, either personally or in the sector you work in? So let's start with Ieva.
And I would say, Agnes, is that for me, let's say trust in general, I would split in two parts. One part is the trusting towards individual. The other part, trusting towards institution, being it a bank, being it a government, any institution. And when it comes to trusting towards individuals, I think that we are pretty good and we are creating it on a daily basis. But when it comes to institutions, there's still a long time to go. Because imagine any practical situation when you need to approach institution. Let it be a hospital, for example. If you want to get to the hospital, you would first think of individual doctor which you know to approach. And the same about the bank, probably. You would be thinking, oh, can I ask Eva before I go my general route? So for me, social trust would be when we really start trusting more institutions, not just individual personalities.
But then about individual personalities, when you say individual personalities, do you mean people you know or people you do not know?
I think it can be both, but you gain personal trust much faster. For example, I just met a club of women, and this club is by invitation only, and 10 ladies came from UK, and they invited by invitation ladies from Latvia. And the first discussion was exactly about the trust, because when Latvian ladies were invited, everybody from us was asking the question, why should we go? What is there? Everybody of us were suspicious. While UK ladies said, but that's normal that you are invited. You should not be suspicious. It's just to create a relationship. And within an hour, we got this trust, and I think we created it. But that's what I mean. It can be both.
The reason I ask is that the measurements of social trust, according to which Nordic countries are perceived to be world champions, well, what is being measured is the extent to what people trust in people they do not know. So you trust in unknown others, in your fellow citizens, and we do not talk so much about your, say, family members and friends. And this is this distinctive feature of Nordic countries, which we will discuss more in depth during this hour. Ivar, what about your personal relation to social trust? How do you experience it in your life, and what does it mean to you?
I was ready for a very formal definition, but okay, let's start with an informal one. I suppose for me, as a researcher, I very often face a negative kind of definition of trust when I'm not trusted. I mean, when I get various grants, I mean, I have to report on everything, on a single cent what I've spent and how I'm supposed to spend. And also I have to report, I have to write down the hours I've been working on the project and everything. I mean, does it really matter? I mean, from my perspective, not. If I'm ready to deliver what I promised, then I'm somehow feeling untrusted in case if I have to report everything what I've done, and only also how to go by writing down and to reporting everything. That's for the negative side, if you're asking how I perceive. But on the positive side, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's a social trust, but I have a very personal and pretty tight trust in scientific method, which is kind of different trusting. But on the other hand, that's a kind of ideal how we can trust something what has been tested, and usually you expect that it will work if you will do the right series of actions. And I suppose you can extend this kind of definition to social relationships as well. So we have a set of, in majority of cases, unwritten ethical principles which we all have to follow. And my guess is that in the Nordic countries, that's something behind this Nordic gold, that we have some kind of implicit assumptions what the others are going to do, and that they will be benevolent, they will be professionally skilled if it's the case of professional relationship, and so on. I don't have to check everything on internet before I'm visiting a doctor, whether it's trustful case to visit a certain expert within the field. So I assume that the one being a nominal expert will be a real expert within the field. I mean, that's probably a couple of examples which popped up into my mind.
So what you're saying is that also data, scientific data, makes you presume that people around you do not have dishonest intentions. That builds up somehow your assumptions that you can't trust others. Like, for example, in Nordic countries, if there's a lot of data stating that it's a kind of well-functioning society where trust levels are high, it would make you trust more in surroundings than, for example, in society where data says that trust levels are low.
Yes, sure. I suppose you cannot live within society and to be one kind of person when you are within your, let's say, professional circles, or you are, I don't know, willing to be a bank client, and then different kind of person when you are meeting a stranger. I mean, there has to be a kind of central core of this, I would say, feeling. I mean, I guess you can have both. You can have this very cognitive approach to what trust would mean, and that's probably what we are getting when we are having surveys on trust, when we are surveying, when we are asking. But on the other hand, on an everyday basis, you cannot go very deeply into cognitive aspects. So what do I mean by trust? By trust should be several sub-dimensions, yeah? Several sub-factors, or whatever you call it. I mean, that's not what we are doing. We simply have this gut feeling, yeah? Or if you are willing to have a bit more scientific expression, kind of heuristic, yeah? We just have this rule of thumb. If someone hasn't shown that he or she is not trustworthy, then we will trust him or her, for instance. I mean, that could be a heuristic, yeah, a kind of rule of thumb.
Okay, thank you. Katju, then about your personal experience related to social trust and how does it manifest in your everyday life? How do you perceive it?
Yes, maybe relating to what was talked earlier, I think on a very personal level, I think trust means, of course, many things, but for me it means mostly, maybe all, that if I'm in a vulnerable position, I can trust that somebody helps me, whether it's a friend, a stranger, or in the end, the government. And for me also, I think it's important, what was also maybe echoing what was said, that it's a two-way street, that also when I see somebody's in need of help, so they can trust that I will help them. But then in the, maybe going more to other aspects of trust and social trust, but in the workplace, this is actually, trust is the kind of main priority behind all of our public administration, public management development work. So we think about it all the time, but it's of course also in the workplace. It's one of the three values of the Ministry of Finance, so it's also how we interact with each other in the working place. So this may be shortly what it means to me.
Yes, and Lars, now it's your turn to reflect on social trust and manifestations of social trust in your everyday life.
Well, I suppose I could, for me, the comparison, but I lived in the United States for 40 years, and the U.S. used to be a high-trust country in the 1950s, but now it's much less so. And so when I moved from there back to Sweden after living there for those 4 decades, you realize in very sort of simple day-to-day interactions, right, with both people and institutions, that your transaction costs associated with distrust are much lower. You make assumptions that are reciprocal, right? You're in a culture in which trust is the dominant value, and it's something which you don't really necessarily reflect on, right? Once you're sort of in that environment, that is part of the kind of the moral logic and the social logic of the society. And it's interesting because it's as we alluded to before, it's not just a question of trusting people you know, it's about trusting people you don't know, right? So the data that you referred to, go back to a index on misanthropy that was created in the United States in the 1950s. So it's really a measure on your view of human nature, right? Do you think that human beings essentially are good and trustworthy, or do you think they are, people that you have to be very careful with how you deal with them? That's literally how these questions are being formulated. And that's different from what we call the particularized trust, that is trusting people we actually know, which is a fairly universal thing. That's pretty high everywhere you go in the world. That's not where the Nordic countries stick out. It's in this form of generalized trust that is something that correlates also with what you were referring to, institutional trust. That is to say, we trust also our institutions, which, of course, let's not forget, institutions are populated by human beings, right? So it's not as if it's some sort of abstract thing. It's actually a person involved here. So as far as corruption, right, which is often seen as the sort of opposite of trust, corruption is being executed by actual individuals in institutions, private and public, right? So let's not blame it on institutions. These are real people out there, stealing money from the rest of us. So for me, it's been an interesting journey, and I give you one little small example from insurance. When I had my insurance policy in the U.S. for my car and so forth, I almost never used it, because if I reported something, the assumption on the part of the insurance company was that I was going to be cheating. And so they wanted to control it. They wanted to ask me all sorts of questions. All of that constitute a huge transaction cost, my time, right? And I calculated that it wasn't really worth it unless it was a really big amount of money. Then I came to Sweden, and I had an incident in my house. you know, it was not a big deal. It was thunder and lightning, a computer and a couple of other electronic devices were destroyed. And I called up my insurance company in Sweden, and they asked me, okay, so what was destroyed? And I told them, okay, what was the value? I gave them the value. And then, okay, so then we just have one more question, your bank account. So I said, what do you need that for? Well, so we can put the money in there. And that was the end of discussion, right? And as an American, I was actually shocked at how easy it was. But for the institution's point of view, right, there was no red flag suggesting that I had been cheating before. So for them, the transaction cost involved with controlling, you know, the information I gave would be much higher than simply just paying the rather reasonable amount that I was asking for. So that's one of the great sort of practical, immediate, tangible, concrete sorts of expressions of what a high-trust society provides you with.
Yeah, well, what I heard, the distinctions that most of you made was between institutional trust in institutions, and trust in individuals. And that makes me think about Anthony Giddens, sociologist, who had this brilliant, comparison between face work commitment and faceless commitment. It means when you interact with institutions. So if we talk about institutional trust, it means that when you get in touch with institution, you do not need a particular face in front of you in order to trust that institution. That you trust that whoever works in that institution and whoever you are, even if you do not know anyone, you believe, you trust that these institutions will take care of your interest. On the other hand, face work, it means that when you approach institution, you only rely on it if you have particular face in front of you. It means face work, that you basically interact not directly with institution, but with the third person whom you trust with a particular face. And if there is not that particular face, well-known person in that institution, either it would be a medical institution or government, ministry, then you do not trust fully. And this is a big difference between, for example, Nordic countries, where we see that people really, to a large extent, trust in institutions, and this is also supported by various kind of research. I just checked data from the latest 2023 OECD research about trust in government institutions, and in that report, actually, Latvia has the lowest level of trust, with only 24% trust in government institutions. And Nordic countries, of course, as expected, had the highest level. And that was approximately 33. Norway and Finland was on the top, 63% trust. So it means that Latvia, lowest, Nordic countries, highest when it comes to trust in government institutions. And then we can at least try to discuss, well, what can we learn from each other? Why are these data so different? And why do we have so low trust in government institutions in Latvia? And of course, it's also influenced by social-cultural factors. And Ieva, may I turn to you? Do you have some reflection about, and you have also been working, related to Sweden for many, many years. What are your reflections about this low level of institutional trust in Latvia?
No, I'm not a historian and I'm not an anthropologist. I'm much more like a real expert. And still, I would reflect a little bit to history, because I think that our history of democracy is very short. We are a very young democracy in Latvia, so we can say 30 years or so, while if we compare to mature democracies like Sweden, Denmark, Finland, so it's completely different experience. People have used to trust and to create trust. So that's one aspect. I think it's about how much we have experienced, and can we say that generations have trusted the previous generations and it has been passed through the generations? Not yet. So we are still very fresh. And then I was thinking how it works, and I really liked, Lars, when you said that it's still people behind institutions. So it doesn't matter whether it's private company you want to trust or whether it's a state-owned company and you want to trust. It's still about people who are on top. And it's also so much tone from the top. And I strongly believe that if you have set as a tone from the top private company that you want to be trustworthy, then you will gain this trust across the institution. So it will not be name, face recognition. But if you compare like what is happening in our political environment and our society, it's so cyclical. We are so fastly changing the political parties, and again the new faces are coming, and it's short-sighted. So I have 4 years to run. First year I learn, 2 years I work, the fourth year I probably gain the points for the next election. And that's where we are. And one example, because you, Agnes, asked about practical examples, which came to my mind, and I think people still remember, when we got bronze in hockey, ice hockey. So the parliament made a decision 12 o'clock in the night that tomorrow it will be a holiday. Good for society, I strongly agree, very popular decision, but for the businesses it costed so much. And it was such a chaos in the society because nobody knew whether tomorrow I can meet my banker, whether I can go to my doctor or whatever. And that was just one example, which was popular decision, short-sighted, getting voters to like you, but it was a disaster. Can you imagine that we would be making such decisions on the private businesses? Most probably not. So that's what I'm saying. It's always people behind. So if you set the tone from the top, then also the institutional trust will be gained faster.
Yeah, interesting. Referring back to the same research report from OECD from last year, it shows that only 11% of Latvians trust in political parties. 11% only. So, but then maybe Lars, you have done a lot of research and written a book about Swedish trust and about the trust in general. Well, and of course we are all very curious about the secret of Nordic trust. Why have you succeeded? I mean, what are the secrets? What is so special? What is so exceptional about Nordic trust? How has it come about? Has it been changing? How do you manage to sustain it? What is special about it?
Yeah, well, in some sense, this is the $1 million question, right? And there's been a lot of attempts, to export, right, both high trust and democracy, and we know lots of failed experiments in this department, and it's very easy to think we're going to just, send, let's say, a Western constitution to Iraq and hope that democracy would appear overnight. There is no evidence that that works. So as an historian, what I would point to here is, just like one little example. Earlier, about a month ago or so in Norway, they celebrated the 750-year anniversary of the first national law. And it's the same thing in Sweden, right? It differs by a couple of decades. But, you mentioned democracy, and I would say, I agree with that, but even more fundamental is rule of law, right? Because, you can argue that Sweden certainly and other Nordic countries have to a great extent been communities of law, even before they were states, and certainly before they were democracies in a kind of a contemporary modern sense. And these were laws that also were internalized, right, as values, right? So that it was, a high trust society operates not on the basis of just policing, right? So, you can have laws, but if people don't feel them in their hearts, you need a lot of police and controls, right, to make sure they follow the laws. And the secret, right, to the high trust society in this Nordic country is that they have internalized, the people have internalized these values. So you have your police sitting here telling you that you don't do those things, right? And when you ask people in Sweden today, in my survey, it's like, what is it that makes you, to find another person to be trustworthy, right? Because it's a reciprocal relationship. Then, of course, they will say things like, someone who is dependable, honest, someone who reports proper information about their economy to the authorities. When I say that to my American friends, they start to laugh, right? So it's something that is sort of deep in the culture itself, which makes it so difficult, you see, to also export. Because it's not just some sort of recipe, change this law, or have this institution, or anything like that. It's a view of the laws. It's a view of a social contract. It is this sort of more positive view also of government and governmental agencies, the idea of a social contract, right, that we all benefit from. I used to say that the most obvious expression of a high-trust society is the willingness to, voluntarily pay your taxes. And what is the most popular, government agency in Sweden? It's the tax authority, right? Now, this is hard to explain, right, to some friends who live in non-Nordic countries. But it gets at this thing that it's sort of deeply embedded in the culture, and it has a long history behind it. I don't mean to say this to make everybody else depressed, but we have to be realistic that this is not something that you kind of change overnight. It's going to be a long process. And here I totally agree with Eva's initial point. Latvia has a short history as a state, as a democracy. You have suffered invasions, right, occupations, the opposite of the rule of law, coming from your own sort of voluntary decisions. So it's going to take time. You have to be realistic about this stuff. I think that over time these things can develop, but it's hard to know how long it takes, right, and exactly what you can actually do about it. So it's hard to make politics out of trust. It's something that is too much going on at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. Referring to State Revenue Service, I can also refer to a research project by anthropologists in Sweden. They did research on on reforms of State Revenue Service in Sweden and how to make people to pay even more taxes, even though in Sweden this level of tax payment is very high. And then what they researched on, it was not why people don't pay taxes, but why they do pay taxes, and then make conclusion out of it. And then the most typical answer among Swedish people why they pay taxes, it was because that they, first of all, they trust that also other citizens pay taxes, and this is the way how we make a better society for all of us. So again, there was this trust issue in paying taxes, and I pay because I trust that others also pay. And so it means that, in a way, tax-paying culture also reflects the level of public trust, right? Yeah. So time is flying really fast, and we have so many interesting aspects. And exactly,
Can I just say one little footnote here, because you're touching something here which I think is important, which is to say that if you're going to move from a low trust level to a high trust level, it requires a collective leap of faith, which is very hard to do, because you see, if you're living in a low trust society, and you as an individual, or we too, for example, say, no, tomorrow we're going to be high trusters. Yeah. Other people are going to take advantage of that, right? Yeah. And Swedes, when they came to America, in the late 19th century, they were sometimes referred to as the dumb Swede, right? Because they were standing in line, following the rules and stuff like that. And people were saying, oh my God, you guys are so stupid. Don't you understand cutting ahead in the line, cheating a little bit here and there is going to be to your advantage? Yeah. The problem with that was, though, that the Nordics were laughing all the way to the bank eventually. Because when a whole society operates on this principle, then everybody benefits, right? But the problem is, you have to create a collective leap, and nobody knows how to make that happen.
Katju maybe has answer.
Yes, because I agree with everything else that Lars says, but there are some elements that you can maybe export or import, and they link to also to the tax administration, also to the predictability, for instance. But one of them is and they are also a historical long link. But one is access to information legislation, and that's also something that is very, very long in the Nordic countries, has come much later in others. And because also citizens can control, they can see actually, for instance, in Finland, that also rich people pay their taxes. It's not just a rumor. You can really see that they pay the taxes. And that way, the access to information is really kind of core. Of course, you have to have many other things, but that's something, the legislation, that I think is one kind of...
Very interesting. I have this data collected here also about legislation and trust in legislation in Latvia. The same OECD report, it says 20% of Latvians has trust in legislation, so we do not look very good compared to Nordic countries. But then, Ivars, challenging question to you. Is it rational to trust I mean, can we calculate trust somehow? Is it rational to trust from psychological point of view?
It has to be, well, if I may, I will say a couple of words with respect to your previous question. Where does it come from? And my answer, what I was thinking over was, I suppose we don't have to care very much about where it comes from, but what we can do with that. And from that perspective, I suppose there is such a phenomenon called self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a pretty much researched and probably overquoted, but the basic idea behind is that if someone is treated as being a bad person, then he eventually will show that he or she is a bad person. And it could be applied also to trust issues. If there is a state institution which is saying, or not just saying, but by all means showing that someone is not deserving to be trusted, then this person eventually will show that he or she is not trustable person. So I suppose it's a kind of vicious circle, and probably doesn't matter where you cut this circle. You just have to start to treat something in a different manner, and in some, let's say, 15, 20 or 25 years it will change. I mean, you cannot get very rapid change. Yeah, but your question was whether it's rational to be
trust, whether it's rational.
Trust others. Okay. Well, I haven't prepared to answer it. I mean, I suppose it could be both. It depends on the context. Probably it would be much more rational not to trust others at certain instances. There is a subfield of game theory which researches that. I mean, it depends. It depends what you can expect from the other party, how the other party is going to behave. And if you are probably in one of the Nordic countries, it would be much more rational to expect the others will follow those principles of mutual trust. However, as Lars said, in the States, probably it would be, at least at certain instances, would be more rational to predict that the others won't trust you, and by that probably not to trust them. And it's very contextual whether to trust or not. If you take the trade-off of your decision, I mean, you cannot have kind of one-size-fits-all approach in this case, because, I mean, basically, you have this dimension of dealing with uncertainty when you are dealing with the trust. I mean, on the one hand, you may have this gut feeling. Yeah, if you are a Swede and you are writing the tax authorities, probably you don't have to think much. I mean, how you will be treated and so on. But on the other hand, if you are an employee in, I don't know, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, whatever, Poland, probably there is pretty much of uncertainty. You have to collect information. You have to collect not just the information on the institution, but also on the person who will read it. I mean, that's quite the contrary of what you said. With respect to this general trust in the institutions. I mean, there is too much of the unknown. That's what I'm calling the uncertainty. I mean, to some extent, trust could be treated as a synonym of uncertainty. How we are dealing with uncertainty and what cultural values, beliefs, or basic knowledge of acting within certain situations are.
And then I believe one way of dealing with this uncertainty is to have strong, predictable institutions. And maybe is that the reason why it works in Nordic countries, Lars?
Well, I'm going to pick up a little bit on your comments, because I think you were touching on something here. I don't think asking it the question in terms of rationality is all helpful, because I would say that trust in the Nordic countries is part of our civil religion, right? So it's about faith, right? And I think that, it means that it's not subject to game theory in the same way. I mean, there's a lot of game theoretical work done on trust, but it doesn't really help you to understand how a high trust society works. Because it's faith that allows you to deal with uncertainty, right? Your point about uncertainty, I think, is right, right on here. And so one reason that sometimes I say even our data on trust in the Nordic countries is slightly misleading is because when you get that question in Sweden or in Norway or in Finland, right, everybody knows that you're supposed to say that you trust other people, right, because that is part of our civil religion. At the same time, people often have a lot of social intelligence, right? So if they are in a environment, a context, right, that is not a Nordic country, they don't walk around, naively thinking they can trust everybody in all of the institutions, right? Then they apply a concept that we also use in trust research, which is social intelligence, right? That is to say, you scan off your surroundings and you make certain decisions based on that. But your fundamental belief, right, that other human beings are good and trustworthy is still not, challenged. But you are able to operate differently in different types of environments. So I think it's important to understand that that's why it's such an intrinsic part, of the culture, because it is part of its fundamental civil religion.
Well, many interesting aspects here. Unfortunately, time is really flying fast. But I think one question to ourselves that we can take with us after this discussion is why do we believe that others can't be trusted? If we believe that trust is somehow, our perception about people's intentions, why are we so suspicious about each other, right? But let's jump maybe now to banking sector, since we also have someone from banking sector here. What are the effects of trust and mistrust in banking sector?
I think, Agnes, I will start a little bit broader picture, not just banking, but economy, because I have always been saying that banks perform as good as economy performs, because we are a little bit like mirroring. If businesses are doing well, we can also gain our business. And in economy, maybe I'm, useless optimist, but I really believe that there is rationale to get better and higher to the trust society. And if you think it's governmental institutions, or let's say politicians, entrepreneurs and society, if there is trust all together, then definitely economy will develop more. We have very high grey economy, shadow economy, 25, 23%. We have very low index of corruption, so we believe into corruption. And if you count that together, you see that also the capital which is invested in Latvia, what Latvian entrepreneurs keep in Latvia, is much lower compared to our neighboring countries. For example, private equity funds. In Latvia we have 320 million, while in Lithuania it's 2.2 billion, which they have accumulated during those 30 years. Trust definitely helps environment to grow, economy to grow, and for all of us to live in a better society. But it takes ages to create it, so we have to be very consciously going towards that. But when it comes to banking, I remembered one example which happened in 2011. And we had such bank, which was savings bank, Kraibanka, owned by a Russian owner, and the bank, their license was revoked end of 2011 because there was liquidity problems, corruption, etc., and the bank had hundreds of thousands of customers, pensioners, and they needed accounts. So it was a big scandal in Latvia. So everybody felt that this bank went bust and the license was revoked. And then just 3 weeks later, there was rumors about another bank that there is similar problem. And on that Sunday, I should say the bank run happened because 10,000 people started to withdraw money. 10 million was withdrawn immediately. It was still in lots. And that's how you challenge and how you make vulnerable this society's trust. So you have one case, you don't really address it properly, and then 3 weeks later, just rumors can create a shocking effect towards banking sector. So I think for banking sector, trust is enormously important. All the financial crime which is happening now, it's just because the society is really currently vulnerable. There is war on the border. COVID just passed, so we have been so much affected with negative things that we are vulnerable and we lose our trust towards institutions, so we look for somebody else. Where can I trust? And then we start trusting even financial crime people.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of chicken and egg question, you know, where does trust start? Is it top down or is it bottom up, you know, and who is really responsible for that? And then maybe, Katju, it would be interesting to hear from your perspective about governmental sector. How does trust building and sustaining of trust, how it manifests itself in government sector? What are the steps taken? How can you, and how should citizens feel it? That there is trust building in governmental level?
Yes, thank you for that question, because I think it's been said so much that the situation is so good in the Nordic countries, and I want to emphasize that this is something that is not something that where we can be born with it, but we have to take care of that for the next generation. So we have to constantly work on it. So it's not something to be taken for granted. And one of the things, and we have also quite big weaknesses in this, for instance, and what we have paid a special attention to in Finland, also linked to the OECD things, is that even though we have strong trust, and we have this saying, Finland is a country of strong trust and little fear, our people feel that they don't have a voice in the society. So they have a high trust towards the institution, but they don't think they have a say, and they don't actually believe in their civic capacities to do so. And this is very, very important. I think that we have to think all the time also in our work the two-way street, and that we also as government trust our citizens. And this is why we have, for instance, put a lot of effort together with civil society and others on our national dialogues. Because one way to manifest that we trust the citizens is that we really hear what they have to say and really kind of try to take that into our hearts and into our work. So it's a difficult thing to kind of map what we should do with the trust, but we have also kind of trying to go from just looking at how the trust levels go to think about the different strategies, looking at the research, asking the OECD to do more in-depth study. And maybe to just point one thing, one particular kind of concrete thing that we're trying to do also is that 10 to 14% of Finnish people don't really understand the language that we speak. I mean, even if they speak Finnish, the language is not clear enough, and they need this really easy language. And to be frank, in our ministries, there's nobody who would be able to speak easy Finnish or write in easy Finnish, just particularly easy way. And this is something that we are now trying to train our civil servants and pay attention, because it's a huge amount of people who have a difficulty to understand what we are talking about. So it's really difficult to have a voice or to trust if you don't understand what we are doing and what we are speaking. So.
Yeah, well, this is also a very good point, you know, to take with us. Lars, you were eager to say something?
Well, I just wanted to sort of build on these points here that you're making that are very important. But there is a sort of, we totally agree on this sort of reciprocal relationship, and we've made a lot of efforts in Sweden too to have what we call a trust-based type of approach to citizens, right? But in Sweden, perhaps much more than the other Nordic countries, we are now facing some very, very serious challenges. We have a situation with rising crime. We have rising cheating, corruption that is coming from the citizens themselves. And a high trust society works, only if you both have trustworthy institutions and honest citizens. And the big weakness, right, of a high trust society, which does not sort of invest in control and policing, which we all would like to avoid, because who likes to have a lot of controls and policing? But it all builds on the assumption, right, that people are trustworthy. And now we see a situation in Sweden where there's more and more evidence suggesting that, well, I'm sorry, but there is quite a lot of people, right, who are now doing lots of cheating and stealing, right, from what are common resources, tax-based, to go back to the tax discussion, threatening the social contract. So we are now seeing that we have to actually perhaps re-establish some measures of control to preserve, right, ironically, a trust-based social contract. And I think that's a little bit different perhaps what you see in Finland or Norway and Denmark. So Sweden is right now in this moment, right, historical moment, where if we don't play our cards right and take care, like you were saying, we may end up actually losing some of that, trust. And that's a tragedy, because we know a lot about decreasing trust, but we know very little bit about how you increase it. So it is a high-risk scenario right now in Sweden. So I just want to add that, because, the reciprocal relationship is absolutely fundamental.
Well, thank you. We only have 8 minutes left for this discussion. I still have a question to Lars about Swedish theory of love. And I also have questions to each of you about what should we do, how we should increase trust. What can our institutions do, the institutions we represent? What can we do personally? But before we turn to these last questions, I promise the possibility, if someone in the audience has a comment or a question, you are welcome to ask. Yes, there is one hand. Is there someone to pass a microphone? There is a lady in a hat, this hat. Oh.
Hello. Thank you so much for very good and informative collaboration here and discussion. You're maybe touching a little bit on this now in the end, but I'm just wondering, are we guarding enough this Nordic gold, the trust? My name is Bryndís and I come from Iceland, where we have had quite high trust, but it went a lot down during difficult times in the banking industry, mainly to do with bank Vikings. But if you could comment a little bit on that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, as you heard from me before, I very much agree with your fundamental question. And what we see now, I lead this big trust survey, and we just got new data from Statistics Sweden. And what we see is an enormous variation in Sweden. There is no one Sweden any longer, right? You have areas which has extraordinarily high levels of trust. Let's say 75% of those who are asked say they trust other people. This is extremely high even in a Nordic context. But then, you have in another part of Stockholm, you have it down to levels of 30%, and even lower in some other neighborhoods. Now, this is related partly to immigration, but it's also related to education, income, whether you have a job or not. So there's lots of different factors going on here, but it does constitute a real threat. And there has been a lot of naivete, right, certainly in Sweden, with respect to these issues. It's like Swedes take for granted many things, that we have a state. We've had it for so long. We don't even know what it is to be occupied or have a revolution or being in a war even, right? So there's a lot of naivete about that. We assume that we're going to have trust. And so there is a kind of a naivete here that is now becoming a threat, right? And we're in this situation. I think people are wisening up at the moment. Question is it too late? You know, has the train already left the station? We don't know. But what we do know is what you were suggesting before. We have to take care of these things. We have to understand that you can't take for granted, right? Rule of law, trust, democracy is something you have to fight for, so to speak, every day. Not just in Ukraine, but, you know, in those democracies that seem to be mature and stable. It's always vulnerable. And that's why your question, I think, is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. And also research says that there is a general decline in democratic governance institutions in Europe. But, well, 5 minutes we have left for this discussion. So final remark. Yes, there is another question.
Hello, I'm from Ireland. I think we're probably somewhere in the middle of the trust Swedish-Latvian spectrum. But I was interested to know where you see the importance of the delivery of the institutions, the systems and the government for people's sense of trust and willingness to develop trust. And on the contrary, the importance and the value of those who breach that trust being seen to held to account, whether that's being brought to court for fraud or somebody losing their job because of something they've done that's breached that trust. So I suppose the transparency of the accountability and the delivery of the systems for developing trust in society. Thank you.
A quick reply, someone of you who would give a comment or answer on that? Or you can combine it, each of you, with your final remark for this discussion in relation to what could we do to increase trust and social trust in our societies.
So what came to my mind, I was thinking, of course, I cannot affect institutions from governmental side so much, but what I can do, I can start by myself. And I think that companies, entrepreneurs, CEOs of large companies should really take active role and start talking about it, educating within the company. For example, if we have found a mistake, that we have made a mistake towards our customer, we should correct it and we should be very transparent and public that we have made this correction towards the customer instead of just, putting it under the carpet and not showing that, we have miscalculated the interest rate, for example. So start with the small things within large institutions because that will make effect on the society. We have quite a big power in companies. And one more thing which came to my mind, transparency. For example, within SEB, we are now going towards the full transparency of our salary system. So imagine that this is one step in a society. At the end of the day, we employ 3,000 people, so they will experience the situation when salary and compensation is in transparent system. So that's what I suggest to do. Start from ourselves.
Well, let's hope other institutions follow in your steps. Ivars, what's your suggestion?
Okay, I'll try to be very brief. Actually, we can find very unexpected and indirect relations with the trust. For instance, we recently collected a data set where trust to the political system was not in a way, probably not initially, at least initially, it was not the central issue, but we tried to relate it to patriotism and nationalism, which is two subgroups or two kinds of how we can have national identity. And that's what we are striving for, to have this positive national identity. And of course, there are slightly interrelated, but as we define patriotism, it's something what we could call unconditional love to our country, but it's a critical way of relating oneself to the country. However, nationalism, it's kind of uncertain identity where we need someone else to be as a basis for our positive identity. So, but we can step on someone else's shoulders, and we can by that make our identity a bit more positive. I mean, I could give almost a lecture on that, but sorry. I mean, I have to be very short on that. But what I wanted to say, that we can have very indirect influence when we are thinking in a broader sense how we relate ourselves to the state. I mean, it's not just an issue of trust. I mean, it's interrelated, it radiates, and it's intertwined much broader than we think initially.
Okay, thank you. Katju, do you have a very brief...
Yes, I'll try to be brief. Maybe 2 points. The other is to keep up the strengths, and we are, for instance, quite strong in being good in reacting, also to when there is integrity breaches and other things. So that's our strength. But being proactive is our weakness. We do a lot of futures and foresight work. We don't use that information, and we don't take the citizens into that work as well as we should. That there should be this kind of power of future that belongs to everybody, and this is our weakness, the voice, and how we proactively can tackle together with the citizens the complex issues. That is one area where there is not that big trust towards us.
Thank you. And Lars?
I think I've probably said enough, so I will just take this as an opportunity to thank you for leading this conversation so well, and thank you to all of you as well, and everybody here who's been here listening to this conversation. So I think you guys said everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ieva from SEB Bank, Ivars from University of Latvia, Katju from Ministry of Finance of Finland, and Lars from University of Uppsala. Yes. Thank you so much.